All right. So we're going to talk about education, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So talking, I guess, a bit about our education system, things like, is it even worth it to get a college degree? Stuff like, what format is best for the person going to college? What do we actually need to be learning? So I guess the content of the courses, and then just the educators themselves and the way that they present the material and their outlook on education.
Yeah, and just to put it all out there, we are on opposite spectrums of education. Like
Yes.
we were talking about before we started recording, you were homeschooled. I was private schooled until first grade, and then homeschooled after that. Public school. My bad. I went to public education after that. Then I have no college, and you currently possess a bachelor's degree.
Right. And then I'm pursuing my master's halfway through that.
Yeah. Are both of those in, is it psychology?
So the undergrad is in psychology, and then the graduate is in behavior analysis.
How far along are you on your you just started your grad, right?
Halfway through it.
Okay.
It's a 2-year program, and I'm finishing up year 1, so...
So how is that? Let's just go ahead and start diving into that college life.
So I guess the first thing to discuss would be, is it even worth it to get a degree? And the answer to that question really depends on what the person wants to do with their life, what your intention is. So I know a lot of the people that I know, the people I work with who get a bachelor's degree, end up sitting on it. They do absolutely nothing with it. And so to them, that degree is just worthless. Especially in the health/humanity type field. If you've got a degree in psychology or social work or health administration or whatever types of degrees that the people I know are getting, I mean, they're just absolutely useless. They are working entry-level jobs that you can have with a GED. So basically, they've spent all this time, all this money to get this degree that doesn't end up furthering them at all financially or allow them to work in a field that they otherwise would not have had access to. The only difference that I see would be social work. A lot of companies are requiring that you have a bachelor's in a social worker related field, but unfortunately they only make like $35,000, and that's if their clients all show up, so they're not even guaranteed that. And I'm making more than that at my entry-level position that you don't even need an undergrad for. So ultimately there's just no reason to get a bachelor's unless you are going to move on to your master's so that you can be a practicing clinician, or to get your doctorate so you can teach/do research. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
I think you hit every nail on the head there. I mean, that's pretty much my thoughts on it exactly. And like you said, we both work together in the same place, and I know that we both know a lot of people that it got bachelor's degrees for. Well, and just there, I don't have a bachelor's degree, and I was working with all these other people who thought that they did.
Right.
Making the same amount of money, and in some cases, me making more money than the people doing the same job with a bachelor's degree. Which, I mean, so in that case, it is just you're paying more money to get that piece of paper than you're going to end up earning.
Right. And so unless you're going to use it as a stepping stone, which most everybody I know isn't, they finish and then they just sit on it. Unless it's it's like the equivalent of getting pre-med or pre-law, and then you never actually become a doctor or a lawyer. It's just not worth it unless you're going to continue on. But unfortunately, even if you do continue on, you're still not going to make a whole lot of money with a lot of the degrees. So like if you go for licensed mental health counselor or social worker, like master's of social work, or even licensed clinical, you're still not going to be making all that much money. like as a master's of social work, for example, I see at companies that are advertising like 45K as opposed to 30K. And when you're carrying student loan debt for both an undergrad and a master's, and then you're only making 45K, I mean, that's not putting you any farther ahead. It's not proportional to the amount of money that you spent to get your education. So there are some fields currently out there that you will make some money. I know being a behavior analyst is one, being an occupational therapist or a speech therapist. But once again, that's going to be a lot of schooling, and you're still going to be around the 60K mark. So, which is livable, but not fantastic for that amount of schooling.
Yeah, and forgive me if I'm mixing up the order we were going to talk about these, but since we are already talking about the amount of money you end up earning for these positions and all of that ties into, do you even really need these degrees that people are making you get to get these jobs? Because most of the time, it seems like you could easily do those jobs without paying for those 4 years of education.
So, at the bachelor's level, no. At the graduate level, yes. Before I jump into that, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, my thoughts on it are just simply, if it's possible to do the job without a degree, then you should be able to do it. I mean, where we worked together, there were plenty of positions that were locked behind a degree wall.
Sure.
That I could have done. The position that I had as supervisor was initially locked behind a degree wall, but eventually was removed because it was obvious you can be a supervisor without having a 4-year degree. The same thing with, I mean, I think social work in general, most social work positions can easily be done without having any kind of a degree.
Right. So at the bachelor's level, I agree. I think when you get to the clinical level, it becomes different. One of the criteria for every master's as a clinician is that you go through a set amount of hours of internship. So, for example, for mine, I have to do 1,500 hours of supervised clinical work. And I think that is extremely important because it makes sure that you actually know what you're doing on the floor. So I would say that that's really important. But then even with classwork and just competency, like as I look at, say, a speech language pathologist, I mean, yes, you need to know what you're doing because speech is so complex. Or occupational therapy, working with motor skills, that's, again, you need to know you need to know your anatomy and physiology to be able to do that. For behavior analysis, I mean, the concepts are very, very simple, but knowing which ones to use or even being able to identify, that's a skill that's not incredibly easy. It's something that you have to learn. So again, I would say having to take advanced coursework in human behavior, how to analyze it and how to intervene. I mean, yes, you do need more than just common sense because behavior oftentimes is not common sense. We may think that we're doing something for one reason, but really we're doing it for another. So yes, I would say you still need further education for that. And then any type of counseling, be it marriage and family or licensed mental health counselor or clinical social worker. I mean, any time that you are diving into somebody's mind, again, you need to know what you're doing because if you don't, it's very easy to give bad advice to people if you're not sure what you're doing. I like to think about it kind of like if a doctor is doing surgery, you want them to know what they're doing, know what that part is when they open it up, what to remove, what to fix, and then they sew it back together. In the same way, if you're dealing with somebody's mind, you're dissecting their thoughts, you have to be very careful to just know what you're doing so that when you alter that thought and then fix it back up, that it ends up helping the person instead of further sending them spiraling downward or just not helping at all because you touched on the wrong thing. So yes, education is necessary at the clinical level. I would say it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, when you get those extremely high competence level positions like that, you definitely need to go to all of that education, so you do know those things.
However, I am not sure if a bachelor's is a necessary prerequisite for it, especially if somebody, I know a lot of people who would make wonderful clinicians and they would do really well in a master's program, but because they're so bogged down with the thought of 4 years of sitting in a classroom taking math or chemistry, or which I mean you absolutely need to be competent in like basic algebra, statistics, etc. But other than that, you don't need to know that much math to be a practicing clinician. You don't need to have taken
English.
Right, yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's no reason you need to go through what all the ones
my
they take.
health credits. I did.
Right, yeah.
I did fencing. Like, why? How on earth did fencing help me further myself as a clinician? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
In those 4 years, isn't it common that definitely the first year, but also sometimes the second year, is pretty much absolutely nothing but the courses that have nothing to do with your major?
Right, yes. And that's for when you don't even know what you want to do. You're just kind of figuring it out or whatnot. But I think an associate's degree would be much more beneficial, something that is just short and sweet and to the point. It gives you your core courses, because as I look at my psychology degree, I believe that not every one of the courses, but pretty much all the courses that I took, I knocked out my gen eds at my first attempt at college. I went for music, and then I switched to psychology. And when I switched to psychology, I just pretty much had psychology courses. And as I look at them, they were all very important. Biological psychology helped me to understand the physical side of things and how that can lead to our behaviors and our thoughts. Cognitive psychology, treatment planning, abnormal psych, developmental. I mean, all of those were just super important, but they also were just part of a degree. Your core courses end up being maybe 25 to 30 credits, which would be like a minor or an associate's. And so just having that alone would probably be enough to help, or to be able to then go into a master's degree. I do understand the qualms of, if you've not taken certain English courses, is your quality of writing going to be appropriate? Are you going to be able to do an accurate APA style research paper or whatnot? But even so, do you really need that beyond basic? I mean, if you've already taken English and math in high school, I don't foresee you needing a level beyond that as a clinician.
Yeah, or at least, instead of having to go through however many years of English classes you have to go through in college, just having that one section that you need to learned,
Mm-hmm.
instead of all the other crap, along with the one little section you need to know about.
Right.
And like you said, those 30 credits that you had, I mean, all of
Yes.
that could just be tied into a single degree.
Yes.
Instead of
A comprehensive 4-year, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And to be honest, looking at behavioral science, they use single case study designs, because with behavioral, I mean, you really are just looking at a single client and their unique behaviors, and you were trying an intervention on just them. Because the field is so individually tailored to each kid that you're working with, you really can't come up with things where it's like, okay, so you have to have 30 participants and we have to find a Z-score to find that we found significant behavior change. You just can't, because they're so diverse. So you have to do it one person at a time. And the level of math that you need to know, and this is for a graduate degree to be a master level clinician, and even at the doctoral level, if you're going to do research, I mean, it's basically arithmetic. We don't even dive into algebra. It's things like just being able to show reduction of a maladaptive behavior or increase in adaptive behaviors. And then, it's just very basic. You can make all your graphs in Excel. It's just, you don't need to know calculus to be able to do this. You don't need to know advanced statistics. You just need to be able to show on a single level that your behavior has changed, that you've actually made a difference in this person's life, and that's it. So I don't know why it was necessary to have to take some more advanced math courses when in reality I'm not using it.
It's all about that money.
Or even the writing. I want to go on to do research, so again, I understand the necessity of being able to write a rigorous research paper. But again, the stuff that's getting published, even at a doctoral level in the behavioral journals, has maybe 5 or 6 sources, and they're maybe 3 to 5 pages long. I mean, it literally is, this client had this behavior that we were either trying to increase or decrease. We used this intervention and we saw the behavior increase or decrease. So why, again, am I looking at a 20-page research paper with 40 sources when the professionals don't even do that? It's just not necessary. So I think a lot of those prerequisites could be done away with, and we would still have competent and capable clinicians coming out from the programs. So I think it just absolutely selects out a lot of people who would make wonderful, wonderful practitioners, because they don't have a 4-year degree when a really 2-year degree would do.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about myself for a minute, just because I think I could be a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Yes.
With someone can be a good person at this thing, but because of all those prerequisites and all this other nonsense you have to go through, they either don't get through college or don't even go.
Right.
I went for 2 classes and dropped out, but I wouldn't consider that I even went. And that's because of all those prerequisite classes. I wanted to go, the first time I actually went was for radio, television broadcasting, which I didn't need chemistry or any science classes, really. I didn't even need math either. No college algebra. I don't think that any of that would have been needed. English, yeah, but I got to take all those courses. Why would I go through that? And I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at what is involved with radio, television broadcasting. And then I wanted to go again for history. But again, why do I need to take math and science and chemistry and health to learn about history? It's like you said, if they would get rid of those prerequisites and just have what you need to take being what you take, a lot more people would probably end up going to college.
Absolutely.
That would be perfect for those positions, and it would reduce cost.
Yes.
And that's why they don't do it, though.
So another barrier, I guess, that I'd like to discuss to people actually being able to get their degree is the format. So the fact that most colleges require you to attend in class, the fact that most of these classes are in the 9 to 5 range, and further that they require you to just set and waste so much time. So I believe that model of college would have worked in a different era. But it's been my experience that most of my coworkers who are either completing their bachelor's degrees or have completed them, most of them are working at least 2, if not 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. Our economy is just, financially speaking, it is so hard to get ahead. And so what I frequently hear from people is that I can't afford to go sit in class all day. I've got to work. I've got a kid, or we're trying to get a house, or I've got car payments and insurance and whatnot. I can't. And I actually ran into this during my undergrad. I had to work 3rd shift because I wanted to get into the field of behavior analysis about 6 months prior to when I actually was able to, because one of my classes that I needed to graduate was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that would have meant that working at the clinic I work at now, which is a 9-to-5 business, I would have only been able to work for a couple hours, then I would have had to leave for a 3-hour chunk of time and then come back, so I just wouldn't have been making any money. So as a result, I actually had to stay working 3rd shift for much longer than was beneficial, simply because that class was only offered right in the middle of the day. So it was impossible to work a 9-to-5. And I think that format is just utterly ridiculous. My master's degree right now, it's online, and I'm tackling material that's twice as difficult without hearing a lecture, without having the teacher to explain it, without sitting in class and bouncing ideas off of other students. And honestly, I'm doing much better because I can just knock it out when I get home, or go at my own pace, or tackle it on the weekends. Whereas when I was sitting in class, what I would do is I would do all of my homework. I would get everything done. I would have studied for my test and be ready to take it. And then I would have to drive 45 minutes, sit in class for an hour for the next 2 weeks while the teacher explained the homework that I had already done, and had a study for the test that I was already ready to take. And just set for 2 weeks wasting my time. And then I would take the test, and then I would rinse and repeat. Same process, get all my homework done, and study for the next test, and then set and waste 2 weeks, 3 hours a day, three days a week, when I could have just taken that test and been done, and then not had to waste all that time. So I think the format is just absolutely inimical for anybody trying to get a degree, because they've got bills, they've got kids, they've got a family, and they just can't afford to not work so that they can sit in school and get a degree that's not going to pay them anything. So the format, absolutely, I'm seeing it shift towards online, but we need to do away with the typical classroom. There's no benefit from it. Even if you could argue that there are people who are more hands-on learners, maybe they need the teacher, which that's fair. I know I have some classmates who struggle with the online format for that reason, but even so make lectures available online. Record yourself lecturing and then put it up there, and the students who need a lecture can watch it, or upload PowerPoints so that they can scroll through those to get the information. There's no need to have to come and sit in class to do that. Exams can be delivered online, and if you're worried about cheating, you can always make the student do it on a webcam. It's just any argument you're going to make for the benefit. Even group projects. We're doing a group project right now in my online class. You just have to Skype call people to discuss it, but it's possible. Use Google Docs and everybody can contribute. It's just there is nothing that you can say about the benefit, unless it's something like chemistry where you absolutely have to be in a lab. That's different. But any just theory-based course, there's no reason it can't be delivered online. And that would help so many more people to get a degree, is if they were able to work still, but then they can come home and knock out their assignments or do it on the weekend or whatnot, as opposed to having to go sit in class and waste their time that they don't have.
I agree with pretty much everything you just said, except I can't say definitely because I didn't go, but I would imagine that I would find being in a class for, let's say, philosophy class or if there's a debate class. Being in a classroom with people to talk in person, I think I would find more beneficial than online. But in every other aspect, I agree. It would probably be better online.
And the way that my degree is set up, again, where you do all your coursework, all your classes online, but then you have a clinical internship or clinical hours that you're doing, that gives you the applied, but it allows you to be paid for that. So you can get a job at a clinic that practices applied behavior analysis, and then you can basically still get paid, earn a living wage while you're going to school. Or even like a once a month or whatever debates, like within philosophy, if you have group projects where like you pick a partner and you guys take different stances on whatever, and then you have to do a video chat where you discuss and debate and whatnot, and then you submit that, you still ultimately would get that experience of discussing it with somebody, but you don't have to physically be in class with them. So I just think that we have not caught up with our technology yet, and a lot of universities are just stuck in the traditional format.
Yeah, well, and with the online, if it is online, they could easily do what we were talking about earlier and cut out all of those other prerequisites, because they're not having to put as many resources really onto the online degrees as much as you do as on campus.
Yes.
But so they're also stuck in that traditional, this is what you need to do for your degree, even online. So
yes. So one other thing on just barriers that I would like to discuss is the quality of assignments. So as we talk about wasting time on courses we don't need, I think another thing that's very off-putting is wasting time on busy work. And that's something that I see that just really, I guess, is something that I feel strongly about, because I feel like it kills the love of learning and turns it into drudgery. So for example, in one of my classes, there is a textbook that we have that's considered the Bible of ABA. It's like almost 900 pages long and just everything you need to know for the field. And when I got it, I was so excited to be able to dive into it. It's like I finally get to read through this and know everything. And then the class that I have it for, they have this assignment where we have to take notes on every supplemental either video or research article or whatever reading that they've put into each week's module. And if we don't, we're penalized. So pretty much you have to watch every video that's included, every reading that's included, take notes on it, and submit it for points. Whereas the textbook, you have to read it to pass your tests, but you're not penalized if you don't read it. And so what ended up happening these past couple weeks, let's see, this past one with the supplemental stuff, we ended up having to watch 29 different videos and read 9 different research articles and take notes on them. So I'm almost at 20 pages of notes that, again, I'm going to be penalized if I don't turn it in. And this is all material that I can find in the textbook, which I still need to read and haven't done because I spent so much time on this busy work of taking notes on their supplemental videos and supplemental readings. I mean, my goodness, I spent 6 hours watching all 29 videos the other day, taking notes on them for a 5-point assignment, and I still haven't read the textbook yet for, this test that I'm going to have to take. So it's just ridiculous that I'm spending so much time on busy work that at this point, this textbook that I was so excited to read, it's just become, great, it's another thing I have to read. And I think that's just an absolute travesty that we're so caught up on doing busy work and menial assignments that really don't have much to do with anything, that we lose the joy of learning. What it really should be is that we should be focusing on reading the textbook, taking notes on that, and then if I'm going to spend 6 hours on this class, I want to spend it memorizing this book backwards and forwards, because that's what I'm going to use, not watching videos and taking notes on them. It's just, it's obscene.
Right. I mean, I understand having the videos because, certain people learn better through videos, some people learn through reading, but to make it all mandatory.
Yes.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And to penalize, and again, I don't think the intent is ill. The instructor is trying to help because it's such a dense textbook. A lot of people have difficulty reading it, but it's turned into this bloated assignment that just takes all your time, and you have no time left for the actually important things. So I think just mandatory busy work and penalizing, and it's not just this class. I've had a lot of classes like this where throughout my undergrad where it was just like assignments were due every week. Like there was one, I can't remember if it was, I think it was treatment planning or something, but like the professor wanted us to write a paper and do a presentation on it every single week. And it had nothing to do with the course other than the professor just wanted us to get used to doing presentations. But it's like, but that's got nothing to do with treatment planning. I mean, so I could have spent this time in the class learning how to write a good treatment plan for somebody, and instead I spent it just doing menial presentations over the material in the chapter. It didn't help me to learn it any better. It just made me deal with presentations in a paper every week. So ultimately, I think menial busy work is a problem, and I think that we need to be short and to the point. And then I think another thing that it does too, another barrier that arises from this is that the way that we assess a good student is very much set up towards people who are typically functioning in their brain and doesn't take into account different learning styles or disabilities or whatnot. So, for example, I've got, I don't know how many people I know who know their material, but because they have test anxiety, they test poorly. Whereas if you ask them to write a paper on the topic, they would do just fine. Or give or people who have social anxiety, and you ask them to do a presentation, and then you penalize them for things like excessive reading notes or not making eye contact or going too short because they panicked and shut down and couldn't think. So just penalizing people because the way that we assess them actually learning, or even if somebody maybe has dyslexia or a learning disability or whatnot, and they're trying, and so they spend 8 hours, and I've seen this happen. Somebody who spends 8 hours reading the material over and over and over again, trying to get it to stick, and then they don't do well on the test, and the teacher just assumes, well, you didn't spend enough time on it, you should have studied more, or you should have just studied more effectively. But how? I mean, obviously the student spent 8 hours studying, whereas I skimmed through the book and aced the exam because I don't have a problem with reading comprehension, but somebody who does, they put in the time. They worked harder than I did and got a poorer score. So that is yet another barrier besides the busy work, which bogs people down. Also just not being sensitive to people's different abilities, learning styles, and whatnot. You should never select out a quality, good clinician because they're a poor test taker. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and honestly, that is an issue across the board in education, from kindergarten all the way to grad school.
If I were a teacher, the way that I would handle that is I would make every exam online, open book, because to be honest, as in my practice, I am allowed to come up with interventions for clients because I am a supervision student. And when my supervisor is like, okay, how would you tackle this behavior? What do you think on it? I'm giving you kind of free reign on this. Literally, I Google it. I Google how other behavior analysts have tackled this behavior in the past, and then I use that information and apply it myself. So the difference is not, tests want to know if you memorized a string of information that you will then forget, whereas in real life, it's not about remembering, it's more about being able to retrieve information to find it. So do you know the terms that people have used when writing about this problem? Do you know which journals to look through to find it? Do you know how to skim through and find that information? So really, what we should be assessing is information retrieval, or just being able to find that information and apply it, as opposed to did you memorize it?
Yeah, well, and forgive me for backtracking just a little bit, but with what you're talking about, being able to get online and find this information out, I mean, that's the case for almost all the things you learn in college.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and then like you said, we should test whether they can find that and apply it. I think that's a really good case for why the degree is a non-needed thing, really.
Right. And so if I were to do it, every test that I would do, I would just do a test over every chapter, but it would be an online, open book, untimed. You can ask a friend, because I can ask a friend at the clinic. I can ask the other behavior, I can ask the behavior analysts at work, what would you do? I can Google it. It's not like I have to, of my own ability, just pull this out of my brain and know exactly what to do. So in the same way, as we're looking at it, really, can you find the information? And absolutely, you should be able to do it with a friend. And then for actual learning, for the love of learning, what I would do for one big project, because most classes require that, I would ask each student to find one chapter, say, of the textbook that they just really enjoyed, and just dig into it and research it and expound on it, because I think that's a fair thing. Because say you're doing abnormal psych and there was one disorder that really piqued your interest. Okay, so learn more about that. Absolutely. It should be a love of learning, a desire to explore, not a you have to do this project and here's this stringent criteria that you have to meet. I don't like that. I think that's just it's not very helpful. It's stressful, and you don't really enjoy learning that way. Whereas if it's just a big research and then presentation of what you found, that would be a much better format than just the traditional, you have to do a research paper and you have to do a presentation and you have to do it over these topics or whatever. I just want to know, did you dig deeper and did you find something that you love to learn about? And extra credit, like, I believe that should be like contingent upon reading science books. Like, a lot of the time with extra credit stuff, teachers will, something that I found was they would be like, okay, go to this talk that somebody's doing. And usually it was a paid talk and it was during times when I was working. So like I was never able to get extra credit. Whereas to me, like, if you read a science book and give me a couple pages on it, then that would be a wonderful way to just earn extra credit. So even if you didn't do so well on an exam, you still have the way or the ability to work your score back up, contingent upon the work that you put into it. I just don't see any reason to be failing people based on ridiculous assessment measures or limiting the amount of points that somebody can get in a class. That's ridiculous. There's no reason that people should not be able to put in effort and work and pass that class. So as long as you can retrieve the information, you've shown me that you have really just love learning about it. That to me is what's the most important thing. Are you going to seek out more information to learn about it? Instead of just the bare minimum, like with that project, are you actually seeking out information to learn more about it? And then are you able to retrieve information and find it? Those are the two. And then giving students just plenty of opportunity to earn backup points if they didn't do so well on something. Because there's no reason to be failing students if they are putting in time and effort. So that's kind of my thoughts on that one. And everything would be online. There would be no reason to meet in person.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that I'd like to discuss is the educators themselves and their philosophies on education. It's been my experience throughout my undergrad and through graduate school that there's two types. There are the ones who are very, if you work hard enough, then you should pass. And if you don't, then you should fail and be selected out. And then there are the ones who just have a real love of learning and teaching and are just passionate about wanting their students to also love learning and succeed throughout their program. And the first type of teacher, I don't want to just absolutely trash that teaching style, because it is some of my best teachers have had that mindset, and I learned a lot from them. So I look back at my first go round of college when I went for music, and the music theory teacher at the school was just one of the toughest teachers I've ever had. But at the same time, I owe everything I know about music to him, because he just pushed me to learn. He pushed me to be creative, to love learning, but he also would not accept subpar work. He was a very hard teacher, but a very good teacher, a very effective teacher. But I think the difference with him was that he would take the time to deviate or break from the structure to truly discuss. And just, I remember an experience where I turned in my test. I was exhausted. I turned in a test and I was walking out the door, and he called me back. He said, "Nick, would you like to finish the back page of this test?" And I mean, he could have just let me walk out of there and penalize me. He didn't. And I remember another time where I got a bad grade, and he's like, "Come here." And he sat down with me and he explained, he went over the material to make sure that I got it. So I don't just look at the tough-minded teacher as a bad teacher. I think that you definitely can learn a lot from somebody who expects a lot from you. But at the same time, I think that an inherent flaw in that teaching style is the just world fallacy. That if you work hard enough, then you should be able to achieve. And that just is not the truth. As I mentioned earlier, when you have things like social anxiety or test anxiety or dyslexia, language disability, reading comprehension, there's just all of these things where the amount of work and stress and energy put forth into this course does not equal the output that's measured by a standardized assessment. It just doesn't, it doesn't equal in each other. And so therefore, I think with that teaching style, you just have to be very, very careful to make sure that you're actually being fair to the students. I think that any time that you have a mentality of most people will fail my class, you are an awful teacher, and you should not be teaching, because it's not about failure. I mean, the field that I'm in, behavior analysis, one of the most well-replicated findings is that people respond to positivity. We respond to positive reinforcement. We respond to encouragement. And whereas taking a penalistic, negative, punishing view just ends up terrorizing people, but they don't learn from it. I mean, yes, you can learn from a bad experience, but if you never then teach people how to succeed and focus on the positive, they never will. They'll basically learn that they're a failure and give up. So I think you just have to be so careful not to cross that line. So that music theory teacher that I was discussing, I think that he had a very fair balance between the two of them, in that, yes, he was very strict He had a very stringent criteria. You really almost never got perfect marks. But at the same time, he would explain to you why you didn't and help you to understand and then achieve better grades in subsequent assignments, because he also taught you how. He didn't just penalize you and throw you away. He helped you then to grow through that process. So I think that's an acceptable and beneficial approach to take. However, as I look at my undergrad that I finished, I had two very different teachers, one of whom was of that prior mindset, and the other who was very just love of learning type teacher. And she would do things like, okay, I see the class isn't ready, so I'm going to move the exam to Monday so that you guys can have the weekend to study. And things like waiving the final exam if we all did really well on our project, because that would show competence and mastery of the subject material, which ended up doing things like, the other teacher, in contrast to her, was the type of person where if you missed a class, it didn't matter why. It didn't matter if, it could be an emergency. She didn't care. You were losing points because you need to be in her class every time. That's the rules. That's the structure. If you don't, you're penalized. Whereas this other professor, I probably missed 10 classes just due to circumstances, with work and whatnot. And she was like, you know what? I understand it. You're doing very well on your exams. You're doing well on your stuff. I understand life is super busy. And if there's any way I can help or accommodate, I got with that class, I actually got very close to being automatically dropped with how much I missed, just because it was at 1 p.m. and I was working third shift. There were times where I just had to sleep. And she said, you know what, if you can come into the office the next time you're here and just kind of talk with me a bit about what was, what we talked about in class, then I'll count that as attendance so that you don't. She wanted me to succeed. She was willing to do whatever it took to help me succeed with that class and with my degree. Whereas the other professor would not do that. She was of that tough mindset of, if you work hard enough, you'll succeed. And if you don't, then that's why you're failing, because you didn't work hard enough, and would not consider other factors that might be impeding people. Like I was only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And so of course I'm not able to show up to class all the time. So it just, as I look at these different educators, I think that as I look at both of my undergrad educators, the one who is just love of learning, wanted you to love it, and willing to do whatever to help you pass, versus the one who is very much rule-driven, strict, and whatnot. I got A's in both of their classes. I passed both of them, but teacher number 1 gave me panic attacks. Teacher number 2 absolutely helped me, and I came out of it loving the topics, just because she instilled that love of learning and that passion for learning more. So looking at it, I knew my material equally as well from both teaching styles, and I came out, again, interested in both subjects, but one of them caused adverse reactions and unnecessary stress and strain and whatnot, whereas the other didn't, and I still learned equally as effectively. So what that tells me is that that's the most beneficial type of instructor, is the one who is willing to work with you, who's less concerned about following the rules and we have to have a final exam because that's the rules, and instead is willing to say, as long as you demonstrate that you love this material and you're interested in learning, and are competent enough to be able to put it together into a project, I don't need that final exam. That tells me enough that you've learned the material. That ended up being the most effective type of teacher. So within graduate school, I have found more of the latter type of teacher, fortunately. For example, in the difficult class, the one that I was talking about earlier with the busy work, a a lot of our assignments, the professor will grade, give us feedback, and then allow us to resubmit it to make sure that we actually learned and are able to get full points for it. Which I think, again, is wonderful, because instead of you did bad, that's on you, you're selected out, instead it'd say, I really want you to learn how to do this. So I'm going to provide feedback, and then I'm going to give you a chance to apply it. So there's no reason you shouldn't get full marks for it. As long as you resubmit it and, follow what the critique said, then you should pass. And I think that's just a perfect philosophy to have. Just that we want you to understand, we want you to learn, we want you to pass. We're not here to penalize you, we're not here to get rid of you because you're not able to pass a class or you didn't follow these stringent rules, so that's on you. Instead, we're going to work with you and make sure you know this material, and that by the end of it, you're not only competent, but that you love it. That, to me, is the most effective type of teaching strategy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I assume you have had your share of encounters with poor teachers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most of my encounters have been good. I don't think I have a single teacher that minus the psychoanalyst, narcissistic teacher that I had. He ended up getting fired from the university, though, because he didn't show up for like over a month, and then he just randomly showed up again and was upset that people didn't appreciate his lesson that he threw together in 5 minutes. So, minus that, like, extreme examples of somebody who's not fit to be a teacher, as I look at all of the educators that I've actually had for a period of time, I have actually found that either style, they've been good teachers. I feel like the second type of teacher is much more effective than the first. Because if you have the exact same outcomes, but one of them causes distress and negative reactions in a student and the other doesn't, then why would you not take the second approach?
It's true. Well, it also depends on the student as well. You might have you may have certain students who do prefer, for some reason, the structure, sure.
Yeah, right. Because we never deviated from the syllabus. When it was made, it was made. Even times that class was canceled was put into the syllabus. Like, that's how structured it was. So I always knew when something was due. Whereas with the other one, it could get moved back but she still accommodated. She still allowed us who were ready to take the test that day, and then we just didn't have to come in on Monday. Right. So,
well, one thing, it should apply for college too, because not necessarily everyone that ends up going to college, university had a job before they went. But one thing that I learned to help with teachers that are like that are extremely by the book, got to do it this way, is by changing their perspective at how you look at the teachers. So I had it was typing class in freshman year, I think, Mrs. Clock. And she was the strictest educator I've ever met in my life. And I absolutely hated her for almost the entire freshman year until, I won't go into what he told me, but my dad talked to me about it and got me to look at it in a different way, that, that's her way of keeping control of the class. It was a large class and everything, but more importantly, she is teaching a different kind of lesson rather than her classroom lesson. That in life, you are going to have to end up dealing with people that have that kind of personality. And in a power structure, you're going to eventually have someone like that in charge of you, and you got to learn how to deal with it sometimes.
I see what you're saying, but that still isn't measuring how good you are at typing.
Yeah, no. I'm not disagreeing with that. She was a great typing teacher too. Actually, did very well in typing rather than
Right.
her getting mad at some of the rules being broken. But and then I did a second elective class with her and attempted to do a third elective class with her the next 2 years. The third one was dropped though because not enough people signed up. But anyway, yeah, actually, me and her actually really got along after that. But it was just a way of like people who do have issue with teachers like that and see them as nothing but, those kind of mean, strict, you have to do it this way. You're wanting to say something.
Should you fail a class simply because you cannot navigate the professor?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Maybe your professor that you're talking about was way more strict than Mrs. Clark.
And that could be the case. I don't think a student should ever be penalized for something that has nothing to do with the class. Like not being able to navigate a professor, or the professor talks too fast and goes through information too much, and because you couldn't pick it up, you failed. I mean, that's not measuring your competency in the class, it's measuring your social skills. And that's not really measuring what we should be measuring.
Yeah, my bad. I did another one of those things where we were talking about two different things.
Sure.
And my bad.
But I agree that it's it's unfortunate because, again, this does apply, as you were saying, to the work environment. You will have to work with people who are like that. And so it indirectly teaches you how to handle that. I just don't feel that we should be failing people based on personality differences. It really should just be based on their mastery of the material.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, not disagreeing with that. Oh man. All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to touch on?
I would say that's pretty well it. I don't know. I guess just looking at the future, it really does seem like a lot of people are leaning more towards online. And I think that as we start to see more people graduate from these courses or programs and be competent practitioners and clinicians, I think that these programs will start to really grow, whereas the ones that don't offer these and can't accommodate, I don't know if they'll stagnate, but I think it's definitely a possibility that if they don't change with the times, they will. As people start to see more and more that a traditional college degree is not getting them money, and further that it's not well equipped to match the needs of our current demographic of students, which a lot of them really can't afford to sit in class. I really see the online format one that tailors to the consumer, which is the student, as opposed to the consumer who's paying them an exorbitant amount of money having to tailor themselves to this program. I foresee it more becoming consumer based and what the students' need is, as opposed to what the university's need is.
Yeah, and you want to... I've got my speculation. Did you want to also offer a speculation of the reason we are still stuck with this traditional college structure?
Oh, absolutely, go for it.
Yeah, so I think it all ties back to what we originally were talking about in the beginning, with the workplace or the workforce requirements to have these degrees. Because the only reason people are going to school to get them is because they can't get these jobs without them. So until we change the way that employers put those degree walls up on certain jobs, I don't think that the traditional school structure or the way that you have to go about getting a degree will ever change.
Right. Ultimately, we will have to make that change. We have to stop giving them money, which, if we're taking out loans, are we really giving them money? But since nobody's paying off their student loans anyways, but I mean, ultimately, we have to make that change. We have to say, I'm not going to go set in a 4-year university when I can do it online. I'm not going to stay on campus and pay exorbitant fees when I can just pay for the course credit and take it at my own time and my own pace. So we have to make that change. And I think a big part of that is just educating people to not go and waste 4 years sitting in class for a degree that will give them nothing. If they are content at the entry-level position that they're at and don't get that degree, and if they want to go all the way to graduate, get a basic online degree so that you can then take an online graduate class. I mean, you can become a clinical psychologist online. That's how far we've come. There's a university that is APA accredited, American Psychological Association accredited, which is a must if you're going to be a diagnosing clinician. And I mean, you can do that online. So there is no reason to go set in class and not be able to work. Because I know when I was looking into clinical programs, I would call their directors and be like, okay, so I'm getting my master's in applied behavioral analysis. I'm going to be a practicing clinician, but most clinics are 9 to 5. So would I be able to even use my master's degree? And they told me no, you're going to be sitting in class from 9 to 5. So there's no point to get this. Programs for clinical psychology, whereas I can do it online. So of course I'm going to bypass that system that tells me that I can't use a master's degree and better myself and provide for my family. And yeah, I'm going to have to either live on a graduate degrees. They'll give you like $20,000 to live off of most of the time, which is nothing. So basically I'm going to have to go back to working third shift and weekends and working 7 days a week and having no life with a master's degree if I want to become a clinical psychologist. And that's like 6 years to complete. So of course I'm going to go online and do that option and then just do internships and clinical hours at local clinics.
How many years does it take to do the online? Is it shorter or the same length?
So it would depend if they accept your master's degree or not. Because a traditional 5 to 6 year program is factoring in your first 2 years being you getting your master's degree. Mm-hmm. So if I get my PhD in behavior analysis, I would, once I finished my master's, I would only be in class for 3 years because I've already got my master's. So if they would accept that in a clinical program, then it would be 3 years. Three to... Yeah. Whereas with, if I would have to get an additional master's in clinical psychology, then it would take me probably 5 or 6 years still. But again, just the ability to do that online versus sitting in class is so much more doable than having to move 3 hours to the closest school that even offers it and then quit my job to live off of $20,000.
Yeah, well, and being able to utilize that master's degree while you're doing it. But yeah, well, I think that's another problem. We keep.
That's fine. This is where we're getting into the discussion now.
Yeah, I think that is another big problem too. Is with getting a job, because a lot of people talk about getting a job after getting out of college, and that's one reason why a lot of people don't end up using their degrees. But I think one of the biggest issues is just that you go to college and you're not working in the that field necessarily that you want to go into, and then you try to get that job and they say, sorry, you don't have enough experience. Right. So it's like just a lose-lose.
And that is why I like the format of the program I'm in, is that I get the experience as my clinical hours. So I will have 2 years of experience working at a clinic already. So I think that format is just absolutely wonderful because it equips you. And then the BACB, the organization that oversees all behavior analysts, they, excuse me, they just changed their rules effective February 1st to where you can just take your exam to become board certified, which is a must if you're going to work in a clinic and write up behavioral plans and do assessments and behavior consultation and all those other things. I mean, you have to be certified, otherwise you will not get a job delivering behavioral therapy. But they just set it up to where you can take your exam anytime. It used to be you would have to wait for like 3 or 4 months until they had another exam date open up. But literally right after you graduate with your master's, that next day you can go take your exam and start working as long as you pass it. I mean, it's because you've got that experience, because you've already been working there. So I think that really helps. A setup like that really does help, as opposed to one that says you're going to have to quit your job so that you can do internships and make, minimum wage. I mean, when I was doing internships, I was making like $10 an hour versus what I make now at my actual job for my undergrad. So ultimately, like, you can either drop down, or you can, in a program like this, work in the field that you want to work in, get paid, work 40 hours a week, and, have a livable salary, and then still get your experience. I mean, it just makes sense. Why would you not line it up to where you are getting paid to do what you're going to end up doing and also get your experience? Why would you ever make somebody quit and go and make nothing for 6 years? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I really think we need to bring back, enforce, and bolster apprenticeship programs. And like because they have them for trades, but for
right.
Whatever the opposite of trade jobs is called. For example, the attorneys. Mm-hmm. In some states, you can take the bar exam without having a degree, without going to college at all, and become a lawyer. But you have to do an apprenticeship like program with a lawyer for a certain amount of years. And that's another perfect example of how people can be great lawyers, but they don't because they can't take the bar. In Indiana, you can't do that. Sure. You have to go to college, get a degree, take the bar exam. That's another example. I took a practice constitutional bar exam, got 2 questions wrong out of the whole thing, and I never studied at all. So, I mean, you could do that for most social work positions, right? That you could just have someone for a year or two.
I've got some coworkers who are just extremely natural, just emotionally intelligent. They can read people, know what to do, how to fix it, just like that.
Yeah.
And they could not tell me any of the terms, but they just, practically speaking, so if they actually worked with our clinicians and were shown how to do the things and the terms and whatnot, like, they could totally bypass all that extra stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's better anyway. Like, you're getting direct experience and lessons in the exact environment that you're going to be working in, instead of sitting in a classroom not really learning how to do that.
So, I mean, and again, that being said, I still see the benefit in the courses that I'm taking, because they're explaining, like, I've taken ones on the population I'm going to be working with. I've taken ones on the science behind and the field and all the terms and whatnot. But what you're saying about the apprenticeship, that might actually be a better prerequisite to a master's than a traditional undergrad.
Yeah, that'd be a really good system, actually.
And then as long as you can pass, like, your competency exams and whatnot, then I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be accepted into the program.
I think we just came up with one of the best solutions.
There you go. We just solved the problem.
Yeah. Oh, man. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.